Imagine you live your life by a single, unbreakable rule. I will never own a car. It's not just a preference, it's a core part of your identity, a principle you declare to the world. But over the years, things change. For practical reasons, you buy a high-performance motorcycle. Then, you acquire a rugged pickup truck for utility purposes. Eventually, you find yourself with a fleet of armored vans for security. When confronted with the obvious contradiction, you insist, with a completely straight face, that none of these are technically cars, and therefore, you haven't broken your rule. This isn't a hypothetical thought experiment. This is, in essence, the story of modern Japan's military. It is a nation built on a foundation of profound, constitutionally mandated pacifism, which now operates one of the most advanced and expensive fighting forces on the planet. For over 75 years, the constitution of the world's fourth-largest economy has contained these 133 words. Article 9. A solemn promise to forever renounce war, and a declaration that land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. It is the legal bedrock of a nation that has, for decades, taken immense pride in its unique pacifist identity. So, how did a nation constitutionally forbidden from having a military build a force with advanced helicopter carriers, a fleet of cutting-edge submarines, and a budget that rivals that of major European powers? And more importantly, why, in an age of rising geopolitical tensions with an assertive China and an unpredictable North Korea, is it politically impossible for Japan to simply change its own rules? The public debate over revising Japan's peace constitution is a political illusion. For decades, the conversation has been trapped in a state of permanent gridlock, a circular argument with no exit. But the real story isn't about changing the law. It's about a nation's ingenious and constitutionally questionable workaround. It's a story of immense political inertia that masks a fundamental transformation, revealing a profound paralysis at the very heart of the Japanese state. To understand this paradox, we need to explore three critical questions. First, what is the impossible math that makes amending the Constitution a political fantasy? Second, what is the current political reality that keeps this monumental issue perpetually on the back burner? And third, what is the clever, controversial, and ultimately dangerous solution Japan has embraced instead? To understand Article 9, you have to go back to August 1945. Japan was a nation in ruins, its imperial ambitions shattered, its people facing starvation. The American-led occupation, under the command of the imposing General Douglas MacArthur, had one primary, overriding objective: to dismantle the machinery of Japanese militarism and ensure that the country would never again pose a threat to its neighbors or the world. The path to this goal ran directly through Japan's foundational law, the 1889 Meiji Constitution. This document had enshrined the emperor as a divine sovereign and concentrated immense power in the executive, providing the legal and ideological framework for military expansion. When the post-war Japanese government, led by Prime Minister Kujiro Shidehara, presented a set of timid revisions to this old text, MacArthur rejected them as utterly insufficient. He saw that a simple touch-up wouldn't do. The entire structure had to be rebuilt from the ground up. What followed was one of the most remarkable and rapid acts of constitutional drafting in modern history. In February 1946, MacArthur handed his staff a short memo outlining three core principles. The emperor would remain as a symbol, but stripped of power. Feudalism would be abolished, and war would be renounced. Working around the clock, a small team of American officers, with no prior experience in writing constitutions, produced a complete draft in just 7 days. This document, written in English and then translated for the Japanese government, became the basis for the new constitution. This history of its creation, the speed, the foreign authorship, is crucial. For Japanese nationalists and revisionists, it is the original sin, the source of the argument that the Constitution was imposed by a victor on the vanquished, and therefore lacks full Japanese legitimacy. But the peace clause itself was not as radical as it first appeared. The key phrases, "renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation," and "the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes," were not pulled from thin air. They were carefully chosen to mirror the language of emerging international legal norms, specifically the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928 and the newly signed Charter of the United Nations. These treaties didn't outlaw self-defense. They outlawed aggressive war as a tool of national policy. The American drafters' goal was not to render Japan completely defenseless, but to transform it into a peace-loving nation, a member of the international community that would play by the new global rules. The Constitution was meant to be an internal anchor, locking Japan into this new world order. The ink on the peace constitution was barely dry when the world changed. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces stormed across the 38th parallel, igniting the Korean War. For Washington, the geopolitical calculus of East Asia was instantly rewritten. The Cold War was no longer a distant European affair. It was a hot war raging on Japan's doorstep. And here lies the central irony of this entire story. The United States, the author of Japan's demilitarization, suddenly saw its creation not as an asset, but as a dangerous liability. With American occupation forces being redeployed to the Korean peninsula, Japan was left a strategic vacuum, vulnerable and unarmed. MacArthur's policy executed a stunning 180-degree turn. In a letter to Prime Minister Yoshida, he authorized the creation of a 75,000-strong National Police Reserve to maintain internal security. This was a polite fiction. It was an order. This new force, equipped with American carbines and light machine guns, was the direct ancestor of today's Japan Self-Defense Forces. This moment was the first decisive crack in the pacifist facade. It was the original sin of reinterpretation, the point at which the gap between the constitutional text and geopolitical reality began to widen. It established a powerful precedent that would define Japan's security policy for the next 70 years. When faced with an inconvenient constitutional reality, the solution wasn't to change the law, but to find a way around it. The United States had not only written the rule book, it had also provided the first lesson in how to bend it. So, if the Constitution doesn't reflect reality, and hasn't for over 70 years, why not just change it? The question seems logical, but it runs into a wall of political and legal reality. The answer lies in Article 96 of the document itself, a procedural lock that makes amending Japan's constitution akin to climbing a political Everest in a blizzard. The process is deliberately difficult, designed by the American drafters to prevent any easy return to pre-war militarism. First, any proposed amendment must be approved by a supermajority of 2/3 or more in both houses of the National Diet, the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors. This is an incredibly high bar, far exceeding the simple majority needed for normal legislation. But that's only the first peak. If an amendment clears the Diet, it must then be submitted to the people for a national referendum, where it must win a simple majority of the votes cast. In its entire 78-year history, this two-step process has never once been successfully completed. Not a single word of the 1947 Constitution has ever been changed. Let's do the math. The pro-revision camp is a coalition of parties led by the long-dominant Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP. In the powerful House of Representatives, even with their allies, they hold 286 seats. They need 310. They are significantly short, and there is no clear path to gaining the extra votes. In the upper House of Councillors, the numbers look slightly better. The pro-revision bloc holds 169 seats, just clearing the 166-vote threshold. But this majority is fragile. It depends on the full support of smaller, ideologically diverse parties like Nippon Ishin and the DPP, whose cooperation is never guaranteed. A few defections, and the supermajority vanishes. The bottom line is stark. The legislative path to amendment is, for all practical purposes, closed. It has been for years, and there is no election on the horizon that looks likely to change this fundamental arithmetic. But even if, by some political miracle, an amendment bill passed the Diet, it would then face the final boss, the Japanese people. And the people are in no hurry. Poll after poll reveals a deep public ambivalence. A May 2024 Kyodo News poll found that while 75% of respondents thought it was necessary to revise the constitution in general, there was a sharp division over Article 9 itself, with 51% in support of a rewrite and 46% against. This is hardly a groundswell of popular demand. More tellingly, the same poll asked about Prime Minister Kishida's desire to push for a revision by September of that year. A staggering 65% said they felt no need to rush, compared to only 33% who wanted expedited discussions. This reveals a crucial truth. For a majority of Japanese citizens, the Constitution, and particularly Article 9, is not a broken document in need of urgent repair. It is a symbol of the nation's post-war identity, a source of pride in its commitment to peace. The abstract geopolitical arguments for change simply do not resonate as strongly as the lived experience of nearly 80 years without involvement in a major war. Constitutional reform is not a priority for voters, which makes launching a divisive, all-consuming national referendum campaign a massive political gamble for any government. The political barrier is therefore a double-locked door. The high legislative bar of a two-thirds majority requires a massive, unified political effort. But the lack of public urgency means there is no political reward for making that effort. In fact, it's a high-risk, low-reward proposition that no pragmatic leader would undertake lightly. This creates a powerful feedback loop of inaction. Politicians won't spend their limited political capital on an issue their voters don't care about, and because the political establishment doesn't push the issue, it never gains the public momentum needed to overcome the legislative hurdles. It is a perfect state of political paralysis. This brings us to Japan's current leader, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. On paper, he is the perfect candidate to finally break the deadlock and change the constitution. A veteran politician and a self-proclaimed defense geek, Ishiba has written books on constitutional reform and has been a long-standing vocal advocate for a more robust military and a revision of Article 9. He has even floated concepts as bold as an Asian NATO and has consistently argued for Japan to achieve normalization of its defense posture. But a leader's personal convictions are often secondary to their political reality. And the reality for Prime Minister Ishiba is that he took power at the worst possible moment to pursue such a grand, divisive project. His administration has been grappling with stubbornly low approval ratings since taking office. Recent polls tell the story. A GG Press survey from June 2025 put his cabinet's approval at a meager 27%. A Kyodo News poll from the same month was slightly better, at 37%, but still showed a disapproval rating of over 48%. These are not the numbers of a leader with a strong mandate for radical change. In politics, a leader's ability to enact their agenda depends on a finite resource: political capital. High approval ratings grant a leader a deep well of this capital, allowing them to take risks and push for difficult long-term reforms. Low approval ratings, however, shrink that well to a puddle. When your public support is in the 20s or 30s, your focus shifts from legacy building to political survival. You don't spend your precious few political chips on the one issue guaranteed to split the country, alienate your coalition partners, and provoke a fierce backlash from the opposition. And the reason for this lack of public support is clear. For the average voter in Tokyo, Osaka, or Fukuoka, the nuances of constitutional law are abstract and distant. The price of rice is not. The weakness of the yen, which makes imported goods and energy more expensive, is not. The long-term anxiety over a rapidly aging population, a shrinking workforce, and the sustainability of the nation's pension and healthcare systems is most certainly not. Japan's economy has been sluggish for years, and recent inflationary pressures have hit households hard. One economist noted that the loss of wealth for households due to inflation over the last few years is comparable to the blow from the 2008 global financial crisis. These are the kitchen table issues that dominate the political debate and determine how people vote. They are the problems that consume the government's attention and resources, pushing grand projects like constitutional reform to the distant back burner. This dynamic was perfectly encapsulated in a recent parliamentary debate. Seiji Maehara, a leader of the pro-revision opposition party Nippon Ishin, pressed the Prime Minister directly on the issue, saying, "It's time to walk the talk. I want you to show your leadership on this issue." Ishiba's response was telling. He didn't offer a bold vision or a concrete timeline. He gave a classic politician's answer, stating simply that his party, the LDP, was debating the issue energetically. It was a masterful display of political reality. Ishiba, the defense hawk, was trapped by Ishiba, the Prime Minister, with a 27% approval rating. His personal beliefs were irrelevant in the face of his political constraints. The economy, and the public's preoccupation with it, acts as a direct and powerful brake on any attempt to steer the ship of state toward the rocky shores of constitutional reform. So, if the front door of formal amendment is locked and bolted, how has Japan so radically transformed its security posture? The answer is the central thesis of this entire story. It has found a back door. For decades, successive governments, regardless of the Prime Minister, have perfected the art of the interpretive solution. Instead of changing the law, they simply change what the law means. This is Japan's great workaround. It is a process of stealth remilitarization, achieved not through a grand public debate and a vote, but through cabinet decisions, legal reinterpretations, and budget allocations. It is a strategy that is both politically pragmatic and constitutionally audacious. The most powerful evidence of this strategy is the money. For decades, Japan adhered to an unofficial but politically potent cap, limiting its defense spending to roughly 1% of its GDP. But in December 2022, the government announced a fundamental shift. Japan would aim to increase its defense budget to 2% of GDP by 2027, the same benchmark used by NATO members. The numbers show this isn't just an aspiration. The defense budget jumped from 5.4 trillion yen in fiscal 2022 to 7.9 trillion in 2024. For fiscal 2025, it's projected to be 8.7 trillion yen. This is a massive increase in spending, a complete reversal of post-war policy, all achieved without changing a single comma in the Constitution. This spending surge isn't just about numbers, it's about hardware. Japan is acquiring capabilities that were once considered unthinkable under a pacifist constitution. The government is investing heavily in counter-strike capabilities, purchasing hundreds of American-made Tomahawk cruise missiles with a range of 1,600 kilometers. It's also developing its own long-range missiles, like the upgraded Type 12 surface-to-ship missile, capable of hitting targets 1,000 kilometers away. These are weapons that can strike bases deep inside enemy territory. For a force that was supposed to be purely for self-defense, this represents a monumental shift in doctrine. Furthermore, in late 2023, the government revised its rules on arms exports, a cornerstone of its post-war pacifism. For the first time, Japan can now sell lethal, Japanese-made weapons and components to other countries, including patrol boats to the Philippines and parts for Patriot missiles to the United States. The goal is to bolster the defense capabilities of friendly nations in the region and to support Japan's own burgeoning defense industry. When you look at the Japan self-defense forces today, the idea that they are not a military seems absurd. The maritime SDF operates a fleet that includes 24 modern submarines and 42 destroyers, along with 2 large helicopter carriers that are being modified to operate F-35B stealth fighters, making them, for all intents and purposes, light aircraft carriers. The ground SDF is introducing a new generation of wheeled armored combat vehicles and mobile artillery systems. This is a force far beyond the minimum necessary for self-defense. It is a powerful, modern military by any global standard. So, how is this legally justified? The government's argument rests on a piece of semantic gymnastics. It claims that because the SDF's mission is exclusively self-defense, it does not constitute the war potential forbidden by Article 9. War potential, they argue, refers to forces capable of aggressive warfare, which Japan does not possess. It's a legal fig leaf that has been stretched thinner and thinner with each new missile purchase and each budget increase. You might be wondering, what do the courts say about this? The answer is nothing. In case after case challenging the constitutionality of the SDF, Japan's Supreme Court has consistently refused to rule. It has repeatedly invoked a doctrine of judicial restraint, labeling the issue a political question, or a matter of state governance, that is best left to the elected branches of government, the Diet and the Cabinet. This judicial silence is not neutral. It is a critical enabler of the interpretive workaround. By refusing to step in, the courts have created a legal vacuum. In this vacuum, the government has been free to reinterpret the Constitution's most fundamental clauses, pushing the boundaries of what is permissible year after year, without fear of being overruled. The interpretive solution is not just a political strategy. It is a system of de facto constitutional change, operating in the shadows of a public debate that goes nowhere. This strategy of reinterpretation seems, on the surface, to be a model of pragmatism. It's a clever, if legally dubious, solution to an impossible political problem. It allows Japan to respond to a deteriorating security environment while avoiding a brutal, unwinnable political battle at home. But many legal experts, opposition figures, and Japan's neighbors warn that this constitutional sleight of hand is a dangerous game. They argue that it creates a new set of risks that could be just as destabilizing as the threats it seeks to mitigate. The first and most immediate risk is regional destabilization. For countries like China and South Korea, which still harbor deep-seated memories of Japanese imperial aggression, Tokyo's military buildup is viewed with profound suspicion. Beijing's official statements frequently accuse Japan of breaking away from the post-war regime and abandoning its pacifist commitments, framing the buildup as a threat to regional peace. This suspicion is amplified by what many in the region perceive as Japan's failure to fully atone for its past. Unlike Germany, which has engaged in decades of exhaustive public contrition for the horrors of the Nazi era, Japan's apologies have often been seen as qualified or undermined by nationalist politicians who downplay atrocities. For many of Japan's neighbors, Article 9 has served as more than just a legal clause. It has been an enshrined apology, a permanent, structural guarantee that the past would not be repeated. Hollowing out the article through reinterpretation, without addressing these historical grievances, is perceived as revoking that apology and reawakening the ghosts of militarism. The final risk is perhaps the most insidious, because it is internal. It is the erosion of Japan's own democratic and legal foundations. Critics, including many constitutional scholars and opposition parties, argue that endlessly reinterpreting the Constitution to mean the opposite of what it plainly says hollows out the very concept of the rule of law. As one scholar, Craig Martin, has argued, This process is an illegitimate attempt by the executive branch to change the meaning of the Constitution, circumventing the formal amendment process that gives a voice to the legislature and the people. If the government can unilaterally decide that no war potential actually means one of the world's most powerful militaries, then what is to stop it from reinterpreting other fundamental rights and principles? This approach, critics warn, threatens to weaken the integrity of the entire constitutional order. It suggests that the Constitution is not a supreme, binding law, but merely a flexible guideline to be bent at the will of the current administration. In solving its external security problem, Japan may be creating a crisis of domestic legitimacy, trading geopolitical stability for the decay of its own democratic norms. We return then to our central question. Why can't Japan rewrite its own rules? The answer, we've seen, is a perfect storm of political paralysis. The legal bar for amendment, the two-thirds supermajority, is a political Everest that no party or coalition has been able to summit. The public's desire for change is lukewarm at best, their attention focused on the more immediate pressures of a stagnant economy and an aging society. And the political will to bridge that vast gap between the high legal bar and low public demand is, under a leader with weak approval ratings, simply non-existent. And so Japan remains caught in the pacifist trap. Unable to move forward with formal revision, and unwilling to stand still in a dangerous world, it has chosen the path of least political resistance, a constitutionally ambiguous but politically convenient workaround. It has built a powerful military in all but name, all while pledging allegiance to a constitution that forbids one. The future of Japan's security, therefore, will not be decided by a grand constitutional debate in the Diet or a passionate campaign for a national referendum. That is the illusion. The real decisions will be made in the quiet, technical discussions of budget committees, in the fine print of new defense procurement contracts, and in the legal memos of the Cabinet Legislation Bureau that continue to stretch the definition of pacifism to its breaking point. The key indicators to watch are not parliamentary votes on amendment. They are the annual defense budget figures, the next arms export deal Japan signs with a Southeast Asian nation, and the next joint military exercise with the United States in the waters around Taiwan. These are the real, tangible measures of Japan's evolving security role, a role that is being fundamentally rewritten, even as the rules themselves remain unchanged. Is Japan's strategy of reinterpretation a pragmatic and necessary solution to an impossible dilemma? Or is it a ticking time bomb, eroding its own democracy from within and raising the risk of conflict in one of the world's most volatile regions?